The night reeked of pretension from the moment we arrived. Crystal chandeliers hung like glimmering spiderwebs, and the air was thick with faux sophistication. I stood near the entrance, stiff in my tuxedo, watching Angela light up the room like a spotlight. "Darling, don't just stand there," she said, tugging at my arm with a dazzling smile. "Mingle, mingle." The word tasted sour. Angela thrived on these events, the schmoozing, the posturing. She was magnetic, the perfect socialite, effortlessly weaving through the crowd. Then I saw him, tall, confident, and a little too polished. His name tag read Julian Meyer, Meyer Development Group. His sharp gaze cut through the room like a predator searching for prey, and it landed squarely on Angela. I tried to ignore it. Just another rich guy throwing charm around like confetti, I thought. But as the night wore on, I noticed the way Angela's demeanor shifted around him. The way her laugh grew softer, her eyes lingered a little too long. Julian wasn't subtle, either. He stood closer than necessary, his hand grazing her lower back when he thought no one was watching. Except I was watching. I made my way to the bar, ordering a whiskey neat. As I turned to survey the room, I saw them slip away toward the terrace. My stomach knotted, but I forced myself to stay calm. They were probably discussing the auction or one of the foundation's projects, right? Curiosity got the better of me. Drink in hand, I moved toward the open doors leading to the terrace. The night air was cool, the city skyline glittering in the distance. "I shouldn't be talking to you like this," I heard Angela say, her voice low and hesitant. "But you want to," Julian replied smoothly. His tone wasn't just flirtatious. It was charged with something darker, more dangerous. I froze, pressing myself against the wall, just out of sight. "Julian, this is crazy. I'm married," Angela said, her voice wavering. "And yet, here you are," he countered, stepping closer. I peeked around the corner, and my heart sank. She didn't step away. Their faces were inches apart when someone called Julian's name from inside. He pulled back, smirking. "Saved by the bell," he murmured. "For now." Angela didn't respond. She stood there, staring after him as he disappeared into the crowd. I stepped back into the shadows, the drink in my hand now little more than a prop. My chest burned with anger, disbelief, and something I didn't want to name, betrayal. Angela rejoined the party minutes later, all smiles and grace, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't unsee it, couldn't unhear it. This wasn't just a moment of bad judgment. This was the start of something I wasn't sure I could stop. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt completely alone. The drive home was suffocating. Angela sat beside me in silence, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. The occasional tap-tap of her fingers on the screen was the only sound in the car. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, the tension building like an overinflated balloon about to burst. "You seemed close with that Julian guy tonight," I said casually, breaking the silence. Her fingers paused mid-text. She glanced at me, her face calm, practiced. "Julian? Oh, we were just talking about the auction. He's bidding on that yacht package." "Why?" "Just curious," I replied, forcing a smile. "You seemed comfortable with him." Her lips twitched into a small smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous." But I wasn't being ridiculous. I knew what I saw on that terrace. That moment between them wasn't a polite conversation about auction lots. It was something else entirely. That night, Angela crawled into bed beside me, her back turned like a closed door. I stared at the ceiling, my mind spinning. Was I overreacting? Was I reading into something innocent because I'd had one too many drinks? But then I thought about her laugh, the way her hand brushed his arm, the soft, nervous tremor in her voice when she said, "I'm married." Sleep didn't come. The next day, I watched Angela through new eyes. She was radiant as always, moving through the kitchen with effortless grace, humming to herself as she poured coffee. But now I was hyper-aware of every detail. The quick glance at her phone, the slight flush that rose to her cheeks when she read a message. "Big plans today?" I asked, trying to sound lighthearted. "Just yoga and lunch with the girls," she said, not meeting my eyes. I nodded, sipping my coffee, wondering how many lies I'd swallowed over the years without even realizing. After she left, I grabbed her laptop from the kitchen counter. Angela wasn't careless, but she wasn't meticulous either. A chat window was still open. My stomach turned as I saw his name, Julian. The messages weren't overtly explicit, but they didn't need to be. They were laced with flirtation, with possibility. Had a great time talking last night. You looked stunning. When can I see you again? And then her response, the one that made my chest tighten. I shouldn't, but I can't stop thinking about you either. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. Over the next few days, I tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to me like a second skin. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of her, of us. The wedding photo on the mantle. The little notes she used to leave in my briefcase. The half-finished jigsaw puzzle on the dining table we'd promised to complete together. What did all of it mean if her attention, her affection, could so easily drift toward another man? The betrayal wasn't even fully realized yet. No hotel rooms, no undeniable proof. But the emotional weight of it was already crushing me. Trust wasn't broken all at once. It eroded slowly, one crack at a time, until the foundation could no longer hold. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just harmless fun, a fleeting distraction. But every time I looked at her, I saw her standing on that terrace with Julian, her guard down in a way she never was with me anymore. One night, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch watching a show neither of us cared about, I turned to her. "Are you happy, Angela?" I asked, my voice quiet. She looked at me startled. "What kind of question is that? I mean, with us, with our marriage." She frowned, setting down her wine glass. "Of course I am. Why would you even ask that?" I held her gaze, searching for cracks in her facade, but she was impenetrable. Angela was always good at maintaining appearances. "I don't know," I said, finally retreating. "I've just felt distant lately." She leaned over, placing a hand on mine. "You're imagining things," she said softly. "We're fine." Her touch felt foreign, her reassurance hollow. As she turned back to the TV, I sat there, drowning in doubt. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Not without more. But deep down I knew. The cracks were no longer invisible. And I was teetering on the edge of an unraveling I couldn't stop. The more I tried to push it down, the heavier it grew. Suspicion was like a stone in my pocket, dragging me deeper into myself. The world moved on as if nothing had changed, but everything felt different. My breakfast tasted stale. Conversations with Angela were rehearsed, like we were playing parts in a bad community theater production. I began to study her in a way I never had before. Every smile she gave me felt practiced, every laugh tinged with artifice. And her phone, always close, always locked, became a symbol of everything I feared. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband rifling through his wife's belongings. But the idea gnawed at me. She'd crossed a line on that terrace, and the messages I'd found were proof she wasn't backing away from it. Still, I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if this was some temporary insanity she'd snap out of on her own? What if confronting her made it worse? Late one night, while Angela was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I stared at it, the screen lighting up like a neon sign, screaming for my attention. My heart hammered as I leaned over to see the notification. It was from him. Julian's name sat there, mocking me. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." The words sliced through me like a blade. I grabbed the phone, but it was locked. My reflection in the black screen stared back at me. A man I barely recognized. A man whose world was unraveling. Angela stepped out of the bathroom moments later, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping. She froze when she saw me holding her phone. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. I swallowed hard, placing the phone back on the table. It buzzed. I was just moving it. She didn't move, her eyes locked on me like a deer in headlights. The air between us felt thick, suffocating. "You could have just left it," she said, her tone too casual. And just like that, she slipped into the walk-in closet, leaving me standing there with a stomach full of acid. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully. Or pretended to. Her breathing was too even, her body too still. She knew I'd seen something, and I knew she wasn't ready to admit it. I thought about everything we'd built together, the vacations, the holidays, the nights we'd stayed up laughing until we couldn't breathe, the moments when we were inseparable, when it felt like no one could touch us. Now it felt like all of that had been reduced to ash. What hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that she wasn't fighting for us. She wasn't trying to stop this spiral. Julian had become a spark in her life, something exciting and forbidden, and she was willing to risk everything for it. What did that make me? The backup plan? The comfortable, predictable choice she'd returned to when her fling lost its shine? I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her, shake her, demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence fester, the chasm between us growing wider with every unspoken word. The next morning, Angela seemed different. She kissed me on the cheek as I left for work, something she hadn't done in weeks. "Have a good day," she said, her voice soft, almost affectionate. For a brief moment, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. Maybe she'd had a change of heart. Maybe she'd realized what she was risking and decided to come back to me. But the flicker was short-lived. When I returned home that evening, she wasn't there. Her yoga bag was gone, but it wasn't yoga night. I checked my phone for a message. Nothing. Hours ticked by, and with each one, the weight in my chest grew heavier. At midnight, she finally walked through the door, looking radiant and unapologetic. "Sorry, I lost track of time," she said, brushing past me. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice low. "Out with the girls," she said without turning around. But the faint trace of cologne that wasn't mine told me the truth. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. When Angela walked in that night, every instinct screamed at me to confront her. Her cheeks glowed, her lips had a faint smear of red gloss she didn't usually wear, and that scent, sharp and masculine, clung to her like a confession. "Out with the girls?" I repeated, my voice laced with something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't far from it. She paused, her keys still in her hand, and turned to face me. "Yes, we stayed longer than I expected. Is that a problem?" A problem? It was a goddamn train wreck, but I swallowed the words. "Not yet. Not like this. Just curious," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face in two. I didn't get a text, so I wasn't sure. Angela tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "Since when do I need to check in with you every time I go out?" She wasn't defensive. She was testing me, probing to see if I'd caught on. I felt the weight of her gaze, calculating, cold. Angela was a lot of things, but she wasn't careless. If I tipped my hand too soon, she'd shut down entirely. "Of course not," I said, retreating. "I was just worried, that's all." She sighed, her expression softening. "I didn't mean to worry you. I'll text next time." She kissed me on the cheek and disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the undeniable truth. Angela wasn't just slipping away. She was running toward someone else. The next day, while Angela was at work, I took a risk. Her laptop was locked this time, but I'd seen her enter the password enough times to guess it. My fingers trembled as I typed it in. Her email opened like Pandora's box. Most of it was mundane, bills, promotional spam, but then I found the folder labeled personal. Inside was everything I didn't want to see. Hotel confirmations, carefully worded messages from Julian, and even a draft email to her yoga girls canceling their last meetup. One message stood out, dated just a few days earlier. "I hate sneaking around, but I can't stay away. When I'm with you, I feel alive in a way I haven't in years." Her words were a dagger, twisting deeper with every sentence. My throat tightened as I read Julian's response, smug and dripping with confidence. "You deserve better than him. Let me show you what life can really feel like." I slammed the laptop shut, the room spinning around me. Better than him? Him was me. I was the husband who worked late to pay for her boutique yoga memberships. The man who stood by her through every crisis, big or small. I wasn't perfect, but I was enough. At least I thought I was. When Angela came home that evening, I couldn't bring myself to meet her eyes. She breezed in, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. "Hey, I was thinking we could try that new Italian place for dinner this weekend," she said, her tone casual, cheerful even. "Sure," I replied, my voice hollow. She stopped mid-step, studying me. "Are you okay? You seem Off. I wanted to scream at her, to throw her lies in her face and watch her crumble. But I didn't. I wasn't ready. Instead, I said, just tired. Long day. Angela hesitated, then leaned in and kissed me softly, as if that single gesture could bridge the growing chasm between us. I let her, but the kiss felt like ash, meaningless and hollow. That night, I lay awake again, my mind racing. The anger was there, hot and simmering beneath the surface, but so was something else, clarity. I couldn't let her destroy me. If she wanted to feel alive with Julian, she could have him, but not before I took back control. Not before I reminded her that the life she was so eager to abandon wasn't something I'd let her walk away from unscathed. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. Angela thought she could have it all. Her husband at home, her lover in the shadows. She'd made her choice. Now it was my turn. The morning after my revelation, everything felt sharper, more deliberate. The clatter of Angela's coffee mug against the counter seemed deafening. Her smile over breakfast, too bright, too forced, felt like a slap to the face. "So, how's work?" she asked, her voice light and casual. "Busy," I replied. My tone mirrored hers, even as a storm churned inside me. "How's the yoga group? Still meeting regularly?" Her hand froze midair, spoon hovering over her oatmeal. She recovered quickly, too quickly, and laughed. "Yeah, the same as always. Nothing exciting. Nothing exciting." The phrase hung in the air like poison. She was a master at this, wasn't she? Lying with the ease of someone who'd been doing it long enough to blur the lines between truth and deception. I forced a smile and stood, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "Good to hear." My lips barely brushed her skin before I pulled away. She didn't notice how cold I felt, but I noticed everything about her. That afternoon, I skipped work. My boss would deal with my absence later. This was more important. I parked across from Angela's favorite yoga studio, the one she supposedly spent hours at each week. At 12:45, she arrived in her sleek black car, yoga mat slung over her shoulder. She walked inside, smiling and waving at someone I couldn't see. For 30 minutes, I waited, wondering if I'd overplayed my suspicions. Maybe she really was here for yoga. Maybe Julian was just a fleeting distraction, a mistake she regretted. Then, at precisely 1:17, Angela walked out the back door of the studio. Julian's car was waiting for her. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. She didn't even look around to see if anyone was watching. She just slid into the passenger seat, laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm as they drove off. I tailed them at a safe distance, my heart pounding in my chest. They stopped at a boutique hotel on the edge of the city, a place far enough from home to avoid recognition. She didn't hesitate. She followed him inside like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stayed in the car for hours, long after the heat of anger had burned through me, leaving only a cold, hollow ache. I wanted to storm in, to drag her out and scream at her for the world to hear. But what good would it do? Instead, I let the pain settle, solidifying into resolve. By the time Angela came home that evening, she was glowing, her cheeks flushed in a way they hadn't been in years. She kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was, as if she hadn't just spent the afternoon betraying me. "Good," I said. "Just another day." I poured myself a drink as she went upstairs to shower, the sound of running water masking the chaos in my head. When she returned, dressed in one of my old t-shirts, she looked so normal, so familiar, it almost broke me. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted her to say something, anything, that could make sense of the disaster she'd unleashed in our lives. Instead, I said, "I was thinking about booking us a weekend away. Maybe reconnect a little?" Her eyes lit up, guilt perhaps mistaken for excitement. "That sounds amazing. You've been so thoughtful lately." Thoughtful. If only she knew. She kissed me goodnight, curling up beside me in bed as if the distance between us wasn't a chasm. As her breathing evened out and sleep took her, I lay awake, my plan taking shape. Angela had turned her back on me, but she wouldn't see the knife I was holding until it was too late. Trust had been her mask. Now it was mine. The morning after I followed Angela and Julian to the hotel, I felt something I hadn't expected, calm. Not peace. Not by a long shot, but a kind of clarity that comes when you stop flailing and start swimming with the current. If this was how she wanted to play the game, I'd play it better. Angela floated through breakfast with an ease that made my stomach turn. She hummed as she stirred her coffee, scrolling through her phone with a slight smile. Her face held no trace of guilt, no sign that she'd spent the afternoon in another man's bed. "What's on your mind?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She looked up startled and smiled. "Nothing. Just finalizing some details for the charity committee. We got another gala coming up." Another gala. Another chance for her and Julian to sneak off together while I stood by, oblivious and irrelevant. "Let me know if you need help with anything," I said, smiling back. "I'd love to be more involved." Her eyes flickered, but only for a moment. "That's sweet, but I've got it under control." Of course she did. Angela always had control. Of her image, of her lies, of me. But not for much longer. I spent the next few days weaving my own web, careful not to tip my hand. While Angela was at work, I combed through everything I could find on Julian, his business, his family, his habits. The man was arrogant enough to leave breadcrumbs everywhere. Photos with his wife at events, articles touting his real estate empire, even a few thinly veiled scandals about bribery and backdoor deals. It wasn't enough to destroy him yet, but it was a start. Next, I hired a private investigator. I needed proof, not just for my sake, but for the precision of the blow I intended to strike. If Angela and Julian wanted to build their little fantasy world, I'd burn it to the ground. The investigator worked fast. Within days, I had a folder full of damning photos. Angela and Julian at the hotel, holding hands in his car, exchanging glances that could melt steel. I stared at the evidence for hours, a cocktail of rage and heartbreak coursing through me. But the pain wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was fuel. That evening, I poured Angela a glass of wine as she curled up on the couch. She looked tired, almost fragile, and for a moment, I wondered if she felt the weight of her betrayal. "Rough day?" I asked, handing her the glass. She smiled weakly. "Just busy. Meetings, phone calls, you know how it is." I sat beside her, studying her face. How many times had I trusted that face without question? How many times had I believed every word she said, never doubting her love for me? "It'll slow down soon," I said, my voice soft. "You deserve a break." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a fleeting second, it felt real again. But then her phone buzzed on the table. Her body tensed as she glanced at the screen, quickly flipping it over. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't need to. Over the next week, I began planting seeds of doubt. I stayed late at work, mentioning vague projects that required my attention. I left my phone lying around with cryptic notifications, watching Angela's eyes linger on the screen. One night, I came home with a faint trace of perfume on my collar. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to make her wonder. "Long day?" she asked, her tone light but edged with something sharper. "Yeah," I replied. "Meetings ran over, then I grabbed a drink with a colleague." She nodded, her expression unreadable. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a crack in her perfect mask. It wasn't enough to satisfy me. Not yet, but it was a start. Angela thought she was in control, that her lies were safe and her secrets secure. But the truth was inching closer, piece by piece, like a predator stalking its prey. And when the moment came, I wouldn't just expose her betrayal. I'd make sure she understood the depth of what she'd lost. She wanted to feel alive? I'd show her what that really meant. The days that followed were a masterclass in quiet agony. Angela moved through our home with the grace of someone who thought she had every piece of the puzzle in place, while I hovered in the shadows, dismantling her carefully crafted facade one thread at a time. Every word she spoke felt rehearsed, every touch calculated. But the cracks were there, subtle yet undeniable. She was checking her phone more often, her responses clipped and distracted. One night, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while stepping into another room. It buzzed with a notification, a message from Julian. "Can't stop thinking about you. Tomorrow?" The simplicity of it was nauseating. I resisted the urge to grab the phone and confront her right then. No, I needed to wait, to let the tension build until it couldn't be ignored. This wasn't just about catching her. It was about making her feel every ounce of the betrayal she'd inflicted on me. Angela was good at putting on a show. At a dinner party that weekend, she worked the room effortlessly, her laughter echoing like music no one could resist. "Don't you two ever fight?" one of our friends teased, watching Angela slide her arm around me. "Of course not," Angela replied with a radiant smile. "He's the best husband anyone could ask for." The lie was so smooth it almost felt like a compliment. Almost. Later, as we drove home in silence, I finally broke the quiet. "You were quite the charmer tonight." She glanced at me, surprised by the tone in my voice. "I was just being friendly." "Friendly," I repeated, my grip tightening on the wheel. She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "You just seemed happy." Her expression softened, as if she'd passed some invisible test. "I am happy," she said quietly. "With us. With us." The words hung in the air like a ghost. The following afternoon, Angela went to yoga again. I didn't bother following her this time. The private investigator's latest report had confirmed what I already knew. Julian's car, the boutique hotel, the predictable lies. When she returned, she acted as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, started chopping vegetables for dinner, and asked how my day was, as though her double life hadn't just played out hours earlier. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "Yours?" "Same old," she replied, not missing a beat. Yoga was exhausting today. I think I overdid it. I bit back a laugh. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Later, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Do you ever think about us?" I asked suddenly. Angela paused, her fork hovering midair. "What do you mean?" "About what we mean to each other. About whether this is enough for you." She blinked, startled by the question. "Of course it is. Why would you ask that?" I studied her, waiting for any flicker of guilt, but her expression was unreadable. "I don't know," I said finally. "Just feels like something's changed lately." Her face softened, her free hand reaching for mine across the table. "Nothing's changed, I promise. We're fine." Her touch felt hollow, her reassurance meaningless. That night, while Angela slept soundly beside me, I worked quietly in the dark. I gathered everything: the photos, the text messages, the receipts. It wasn't just evidence. It was ammunition. The upcoming Charity Gala was the perfect stage. Angela thought she could balance both lives indefinitely, that I'd never see the truth behind her carefully painted smile. She was wrong. The pieces were in place, and I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to ensure that the mask she wore so proudly would shatter in front of everyone she cared about. If she wanted to gamble with our marriage, then I'd make sure she understood the stakes. The clock was ticking, and Angela didn't even know the game was about to end. The week leading up to the Charity Gala felt like walking a tightrope strung above a pit of fire. Angela moved around me with the ease of someone who thought she was untouchable, while I stayed calm, deliberate, biding my time. The evidence sat in a sleek black folder hidden in my desk drawer, a collection of damning truths. Every time I opened it, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions: rage at her betrayal, sadness for the man I'd been before I knew, and something darker, anticipation for what was to come. Angela was excited about the gala, of course. It was her favorite event of the year, the one where she could shine brightest in the room. "It's going to be magical," she said one night, scrolling through photos of designer dresses on her tablet. "Everyone will be there. Everyone, including Julian." "Can't wait," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She looked up at me, her eyes gleaming. "You're not usually this enthusiastic." "Trying something new?" I replied. "I think it'll be good for us." Her smile faltered for the briefest moment, but she quickly recovered. "I think so too." The layers of irony in that exchange nearly made me laugh. On the day of the gala, Angela spent hours getting ready, slipping into a deep emerald gown that hugged her frame like it had been made for her. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup flawless. She looked like the perfect wife, the kind of woman any man would be lucky to have. But I knew better. "You look stunning," I said, handing her the diamond earrings I'd bought her 2 anniversaries ago. Her eyes softened, a flicker of something almost genuine crossing her face. "Thank you." I adjusted my cufflinks and met her gaze in the mirror. "Tonight's going to be unforgettable." She smiled, her reflection glowing with pride. "I know." "Oh, Angela, you have no idea." The ballroom was a spectacle of glittering lights, elegant decor, and people too well-dressed to be real. Angela was in her element, laughing and chatting, her hand resting lightly on my arm as she worked the room. I watched her carefully, noting how her gaze flicked to the entrance every so often. She was waiting for him, and then Julian arrived. He strode in confidently, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth as his eyes swept the crowd. They landed on Angela. Her hand tightened on my arm for the briefest second before she let go, excusing herself to greet someone across the room. I followed her with my eyes, watching as she and Julian exchanged what they probably thought were subtle glances. I felt my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to relax. Patience. Timing was everything. The night wore on, and the guests were called to their tables for the evening's program. Angela and I sat near the stage, surrounded by city officials, philanthropists, and socialites. Julian sat 2 tables away, his presence like a thorn pressing deeper into my side. He caught Angela's eye again, and she gave him the smallest, most private of smiles. It was time. The MC stepped up to the microphone to announce the evening's highlight, the Donor of the Year award. To present this year's award, the MC said, "We have a special guest, Angela's husband, Mark. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage." Angela's head whipped toward me, her smile freezing. I rose smoothly, the black folder tucked under my arm, and strode to the stage. The room applauded politely, unaware of the bomb I was about to drop. I reached the podium, clearing my throat. "Thank you for having me," I began, my voice steady. "It's an honor to present this award to someone who embodies generosity, ambition, and integrity." Angela's smile began to return, but I didn't stop. "However, tonight, I want to highlight another side of this world we all occupy, a side that thrives on deception and betrayal." Gasps rippled through the crowd as I opened the folder and displayed the first photo on the projector. Angela and Julian, hand in hand, entering the boutique hotel. The room erupted into murmurs, disbelief spreading like wildfire. Angela's face turned ashen, her hand shooting to her mouth. Julian's smirk disappeared. "Angela," I said, looking directly at her, "you've spent years perfecting the art of appearances. Tonight, I thought it was time for everyone to see what's beneath the surface." Her mask shattered in front of everyone, and in that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in months: power. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Angela sat frozen at our table, her complexion drained of its warmth. Julian's chair was conspicuously empty. He'd bolted the second the first image hit the projector. The crowd buzzed with murmurs, the sharp-edged whispers of scandal slicing through the air like knives. I stepped down from the podium, each footfall deliberate and measured, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look at Angela as I returned to my seat. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and sipped it slowly, savoring the rare taste of control. She finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "What have you done?" I turned to her, my face calm, but my voice cold enough to freeze the room. "What I've done?" "Angela, this is all you." Her eyes darted around the room, panic creeping in as she realized there was nowhere to hide. Faces she'd smiled at for years now looked at her with judgment, curiosity, and pity. "You didn't have to," she started, her voice trembling. "Didn't I?" I leaned closer, keeping my voice low enough for only her to hear. "You made your choice, Angela. You gambled with everything, and now you're shocked that the house is collecting?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. A commotion near the doors drew my attention. Julian's wife had arrived, her face twisted with fury as she stormed through the crowd, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice sharp and clear. "Where is my husband?" The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and she stood there, scanning the room until her eyes landed on Angela. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Angela shrank under her gaze, her lips trembling as if searching for words that wouldn't come. Julian's wife didn't wait. She marched over, her hands trembling with rage. "You," she spat, her voice low but lethal. "You thought you could take my life, my family, and get away with it?" Angela shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. I didn't mean to." Julian's wife laughed bitterly. "You think this is some harmless little game? Let me tell you something, sweetheart, this isn't over." With that, she turned on her heel and strode out, leaving Angela crumpled in her chair like a broken doll. I stood, adjusting my jacket. "It's been quite the evening," I said dryly. "I think I'll call it a night." Angela reached for my arm, desperation replacing her earlier indignation. "Please, Mark, let's talk about this." I pulled back, my voice sharp. "Talk? Now you want to talk? After months of lies? After you humiliated me and gutted our marriage for some sleazy real estate con artist?" Her tears spilled over, but they did nothing to move me. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she sobbed. "But you meant for it to happen," I shot back. "You made every choice that brought us here. You don't get to cry your way out of this." Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment I almost felt pity. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, the nights I lay awake wondering why I wasn't enough. "You wanted freedom, Angela?" I said, my voice steady and low. "You've got it. Congratulations." I turned and walked away, each step feeling lighter than the last. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a wave, clearing the remnants of the storm inside. I didn't know what came next, divorce papers, separation, or just the slow process of rebuilding the life Angela had torn apart. But for the first time in months, I felt in control. Control over myself. Control over my future. As I hailed a cab, I glanced back at the grand ballroom, its windows glowing with light and opulence. Angela had thrived in that world, hiding behind her perfect image. But now, the mask was gone. And me? I wasn't the same man who walked into that gala. I wasn't the loyal, unsuspecting husband who believed in a love that didn't exist. I was free. The morning after the gala, the house was silent. Angela had slept in the guest room, or maybe she hadn't slept at all. I didn't care. The weight of her absence from our shared bed was oddly comforting. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window as the sun rose over the city. The faint sound of traffic hummed in the distance, a reminder that the world moved on, even when everything in mine had shifted. The night before had been both destruction and liberation. Angela's perfect world had crumbled, and with it, the illusions I'd clung to for too long. There was no going back, but the path forward felt uncharted and jagged. I heard the soft shuffle of her footsteps behind me. She paused in the doorway, hesitant. "Mark," she said, her voice raw and trembling. I didn't turn around. "What do you want, Angela?" "Please." Her voice cracked. "We need to talk." I set my mug down, the weight of it grounding me. Slowly, I turned to face her. She looked like a shadow of the woman I'd married, her eyes puffy from crying, her usually immaculate hair disheveled. "I don't think there's much left to say," I replied, my voice calm. She stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I'm sorry. For everything. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back, but I don't want to lose you." I laughed, the sound bitter and foreign in my ears. "Lose me? Angela, you didn't just lose me. You threw me away. For what? A cheap thrill? A man who bolted the second things got messy?" Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was stupid. I was selfish. I wasn't thinking." "No," I interrupted, my tone sharp. "You were thinking. You knew exactly what you were doing. Don't insult me by pretending this was some accident." She sank into a chair across from me, her shoulders slumped. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You can't fix this. This isn't a broken chair or a cracked vase. This is our marriage, Angela, and you shattered it." Her sobs filled the room, but they didn't move me. Not this time. For months, I drowned in my pain, but now it was hers to carry. "I thought I knew you." I said after a long silence. I thought we were a team, that we'd always face the world together. But you weren't just unfaithful. You were cruel. You lied to my face, day after day, while I trusted you. While I loved you. I still love you, she said, her voice barely audible. I shook my head. No, you don't. You love the convenience, the stability, the life we built together. But real love doesn't do this. Real love doesn't destroy. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. The gesture felt too little, too late. I'm filing for divorce, I said, the words steady and final. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I saw the full weight of her actions hit her. But I didn't feel satisfaction, only relief. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, packed boxes, and quiet goodbyes. Angela moved out, leaving behind echoes of a life I no longer recognized. At first, the emptiness was suffocating. The house felt too quiet, the nights too long. But slowly, I began to reclaim the pieces of myself she'd stolen. I started running again, my feet pounding the pavement like a heartbeat. I reconnected with old friends, sharing laughs that felt like oxygen. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to dream about a future that didn't include her. One night, as I sat on the balcony with a glass of whiskey, staring at the city lights, I thought about everything Angela had done. The betrayal, the lies, the way she'd turned our marriage into a facade. But I also thought about myself, the man I'd been before her affair, and the man I was now. I wasn't the same. I was stronger, sharper, and painfully aware of the cost of trusting too deeply. But I wasn't bitter. Angela had taught me something I didn't expect, that even in the face of betrayal, there's a chance to rebuild. Not the relationship, but yourself. And as I sat there, the city alive around me, I realized I was ready. Ready to let go. Ready to move on. Ready to live again. The chapter with Angela was over, but my story was just beginning.